It was a rainy night as I drove along a desolate stretch of highway, the windshield wipers beating a steady rhythm against the glass. The road stretched out before me, empty and seemingly endless, the only illumination coming from the dim glow of my headlights. That's when I saw him, a figure standing on the side of the road, his thumb extended in a silent plea for a ride. Without thinking, I slowed down and pulled over, my heart pounding in my chest as I rolled down the window to offer him a lift. He climbed into the passenger seat without a word, his face obscured by the hood of his jacket, the rain dripping from the brim of his hat. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the only sound the steady drumming of the rain against the roof of the car. But as we drove on, he began to speak, in cryptic, disjointed phrases that sent a shiver down my spine. He talked about the weather, about the road, about nothing and everything all at once, his words weaving a tangled web of confusion and unease. I tried to brush off his strange behavior, chalking it up to the late hour and the isolated stretch of road we found ourselves on. But the feeling of unease lingered, growing stronger with each passing mile. As we continued to converse, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about him, something dark and unsettling that lurked just beneath the surface. His eyes darted back and forth, never quite meeting mine, his hands fidgeting nervously in his lap. I tried to focus on the road ahead, to block out the creeping sense of dread that threatened to consume me. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in danger, that I had made a terrible mistake by picking up this hitchhiker in the first place. I considered pulling over and asking him to leave, but something held me back, a sense of fear and uncertainty that paralyzed me in my seat. And so, I continued to drive, my mind racing with thoughts of escape and survival. But just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a knife, a gleaming blade that glinted in the dim light of the car. My heart leapt into my throat as I realized the danger I was in, the adrenaline coursing through my veins as I fought to keep control of the car. In that moment of panic, I knew I had to act fast, to do whatever it took to survive and escape from this nightmare. With trembling hands, I reached for the door handle, ready to leap from the car and run for my life. But before I could make a move, he spoke, his voice low and menacing, his words sending a chill down my spine. "You shouldn't have picked me up," he said, his tone dripping with malice. "Now, you're going to pay the price." I felt a surge of fear wash over me as I realized the gravity of the situation, that I was alone, trapped in a car with a dangerous stranger who had no intention of letting me go. Panic set in as I struggled to think clearly, to come up with a plan to escape from this nightmare. But just when it seemed like all hope was lost, I saw it, the faint glow of headlights in the distance, a beacon of hope in the darkness. With renewed determination, I pressed down on the gas pedal, willing the car to go faster, to reach safety before it was too late. As we drew closer to the approaching vehicle, I felt a surge of relief wash over me, relief that I had survived this terrifying ordeal, that I had managed to outwit my would-be attacker and escape with my life. I'll never forget the day my partner and I stumbled upon something straight out of a nightmare. It was just another road trip, cruising down a lonely stretch of highway in the middle of nowhere. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the empty road as we chatted and listened to music. But then, out of nowhere, we heard it. A faint crackle over the radio, followed by a desperate voice pleading for help. It was a distress call from a stranded motorist, their voice filled with panic and fear. My partner and I exchanged a glance, our instincts kicking in as we realized we couldn't just ignore someone in trouble. We decided to investigate, hoping we could lend a hand and maybe even save a life. As we drove toward the source of the distress call, the road grew increasingly desolate. The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving us shrouded in darkness as we navigated the winding roads. Eventually, we spotted a car up ahead, its hazard lights flashing in the gloom. We pulled up alongside it, our hearts pounding in our chests as we prepared to offer assistance. But as we approached, something felt off. The car looked abandoned, its doors hanging open and its engine silent. There was no sign of the motorist who had sent out the distress call. My partner and I shared a nervous glance, the hairs on the back of our necks standing on end as we realized we might have walked right into a trap. Just then, we heard the sound of footsteps approaching from the darkness. We whirled around to see a group of figures emerging from the shadows, their faces twisted into grotesque masks of malice. Panic surged through me as I realized we were outnumbered and outgunned. My partner and I exchanged a silent nod, our only hope of survival resting on our ability to think and act quickly. But before we could make a move, the group descended upon us with terrifying speed and ferocity. They dragged us from our car, their hands like iron grips around our arms as they forced us to our knees. I felt a surge of adrenaline as I struggled against their hold, my mind racing as I searched for a way out of this nightmare. But no matter how hard I fought, I couldn't break free from their grasp. Suddenly, one of the figures stepped forward, their face hidden behind a sinister mask adorned with jagged edges and twisted features. They brandished a knife, its blade gleaming in the moonlight as they advanced toward us with slow, deliberate steps. My heart pounded in my chest as I braced myself for the worst, my mind racing with fear and desperation. But just as the figure raised the knife, a sudden burst of noise echoed through the night. It was the sound of approaching sirens, growing louder and louder with each passing moment. The group faltered, their grip loosening as they glanced nervously at one another. In that split second of hesitation, my partner and I seized our chance. We broke free from their hold and sprinted toward our car, adrenaline coursing through our veins as we raced to safety. As we sped away from the scene, the flashing lights of the approaching police cars filled me with a sense of relief and gratitude. We had escaped with our lives, but the memory of that night would haunt me forever. To this day, I can't shake the feeling of terror that washed over me in those dark moments. I was driving down a deserted road late at night when I saw a car, parked haphazardly in the middle of the road, its hazard lights flashing. At first, I thought it might have broken down, but as I got closer, I could see that something wasn't right. There was no one around, no sign of the driver anywhere. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should turn around and find another route, but something compelled me to stop and investigate. I pulled up behind the car and got out, my heart pounding in my chest. As I approached, I could see that the driver's side door was hanging open, swinging gently in the breeze. I peered inside, half expecting to find someone slumped over the steering wheel, but the car was empty. That's when I noticed a piece of paper, folded neatly on the dashboard. I reached out and unfolded it, my hands trembling as I read the words scrawled across the page. "Help me," it said, the letters smeared with what looked like blood. My stomach churned as I realized what I was holding, a cry for help from someone in trouble. Without thinking, I turned and ran back to my car, fumbling with the keys as I tried to start the engine. But before I could pull away, I heard a noise coming from the darkness beyond the road, a low, guttural sound that sent a shiver down my spine. I looked up to see a figure emerging from the shadows, moving towards me with slow, deliberate steps. My blood ran cold as I realized that whoever had left that note was still out there, watching and waiting. Panic set in as I realized that I was trapped, with no way to escape. I frantically searched for my phone, but it was nowhere to be found, lost in the chaos of the moment. I glanced back at the car, hoping against hope that whoever had left the note was still alive, that I could help them somehow. But as I looked closer, I could see that the blood on the note was fresh, still wet and glistening in the moonlight. A sense of dread washed over me as I realized that I was in way over my head, that I had stumbled into something far more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. I knew I had to get out of there, to find help before it was too late. But as I turned to run, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me, growing louder and closer with each passing second. I ran as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest as I raced through the darkness, my mind racing with thoughts of what might happen if I didn't make it out alive. I stumbled and fell, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I struggled to get back to my feet. But before I could get far, I felt a hand grab hold of my ankle, dragging me back into the darkness. I screamed and thrashed, trying to break free, but it was no use. The grip on my ankle only tightened, pulling me further and further away from safety. I fought with every ounce of strength I had left, determined not to go down without a fight. But as I looked up into the face of my attacker, I knew that I was no match for them. I closed my eyes and braced for the worst, but instead of feeling a blow or a knife at my throat, I heard a voice, low and urgent. "Run," it said, and I didn't need to be told twice. I scrambled to my feet and took off, not daring to look back until I was safely out of sight. When I finally stopped running, I collapsed on the ground, shaking and gasping for breath. I had no idea what had just happened, or how I had managed to escape with my life. It was a typical night as I drove home from work, the streets quiet and deserted. But as I glanced in my rearview mirror, I noticed a car following closely behind me, its headlights piercing the darkness. At first, I didn't think much of it, assuming it was just another driver headed in the same direction. But as I turned onto side streets and took detours in an attempt to lose the car, I realized that it wasn't just coincidence. The car was following me, deliberately matching my every move. Panic began to rise in my chest as I tried to make sense of the situation, my mind racing with possibilities. I considered calling the police, but something held me back, a nagging fear that doing so would only escalate the situation further. And so, I continued to drive, my heart pounding in my chest as I searched for a way out of this terrifying predicament. But no matter where I turned, the car was always there, its presence like a dark shadow looming over me. It was as if the driver was playing a twisted game of cat and mouse, toying with me for their own amusement. As the minutes stretched into hours, I grew more and more desperate, my thoughts consumed by the need to escape from this relentless pursuit. But no matter how fast I drove or how many turns I made, the car was always right behind me, its headlights glaring in my rearview mirror like accusing eyes. I tried to remain calm, to think rationally about what to do next, but fear clouded my judgment, leaving me paralyzed with indecision. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, the car pulled alongside me, the driver's face hidden in the darkness. For a moment, we locked eyes, a silent understanding passing between us, a recognition of the danger we both faced. And then, without warning, the driver swerved in front of me, forcing me to slam on the brakes to avoid a collision. I watched in horror as the car disappeared into the night, leaving me shaken and alone on the deserted road. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of what had just happened, the adrenaline coursing through my veins as I struggled to regain control of my emotions. But even as I tried to convince myself that it was over, that I was safe at last, a nagging feeling of unease lingered in the back of my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that the driver was still out there, watching and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And so, with a sense of dread weighing heavy on my heart, I continued on my journey home, the memory of that terrifying encounter etched into my mind forever. But as I pulled into my driveway and stepped out of the car, a wave of relief washed over me, relief that I had survived the nightmarish ordeal, that I had outwitted my would-be attacker and escaped with my life. As I locked the door behind me and stepped into the safety of my home, I realized I was now safe. It all started innocently enough. My partner and I were on a road trip, enjoying the freedom of the open road as we traveled through the countryside. We had no set destination, just a desire to explore and see where the journey would take us. As we drove, we noticed a sign for a small town that we'd never heard of before. Intrigued, we decided to take a detour and see what it had to offer. But as we entered the town, something felt off. The streets were eerily quiet, with not a soul in sight. It was as if the entire town had been abandoned. Despite our unease, we pressed on, our curiosity getting the better of us as we explored the empty streets and crumbling buildings. But as we ventured further into the heart of the town, we began to notice signs of life. Curtains twitched in the windows, and we caught glimpses of shadowy figures moving in the darkness. We tried to brush off our growing sense of unease, telling ourselves that it was just our imagination running wild. But deep down, we knew that something wasn't right about this place. Our suspicions were confirmed when we stumbled upon a hidden cellar beneath one of the abandoned houses. It was filled with strange symbols and artifacts, hinting at a dark and sinister past. As we examined the cellar, a chill ran down my spine. It was as if we had uncovered something that was meant to stay hidden, something that the townspeople didn't want us to find. Before we could make sense of what we had discovered, we heard the sound of footsteps approaching from above. We froze, our hearts pounding in our chests as we waited for whoever it was to reveal themselves. But instead of friendly faces, we were greeted by a group of sinister figures emerging from the shadows. Their eyes gleamed with malice as they surrounded us, their intentions clear. Panic surged through me as I realized that we were trapped, at the mercy of these unknown assailants. My partner and I exchanged a desperate glance, silently communicating our fear and uncertainty. With no other options, we ran. We dashed through the narrow streets, our breath coming in ragged gasps as we fled from our pursuers. But no matter how fast we ran, they were always one step behind us. It was as if they knew the town like the back of their hands, anticipating our every move with chilling accuracy. As we ducked down alleyways and darted between buildings, I could feel the weight of fear pressing down on me. It was a primal terror, the kind that made my heart race and my palms sweat with adrenaline. But despite the odds stacked against us, we refused to give up. We pushed ourselves to the limit, driven by the instinctual desire to survive at all costs. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we saw our chance for escape. A narrow gap between two buildings led to the outskirts of town, offering us a fleeting glimpse of freedom. We sprinted toward the opening, our lungs burning with exertion as we raced to put as much distance between us and our pursuers as possible. And then, just when it seemed like all hope was lost, we burst out into the open countryside, the cool night air washing over us like a welcome embrace. We didn't stop running until we were miles away from that cursed town, our legs trembling with exhaustion as we collapsed onto the ground. But even as we caught our breath and tried to make sense of what had just happened, we knew that we would never forget the horrors we had witnessed that night. To this day, the memory of that deserted town and its sinister inhabitants haunts my dreams. So, I was driving alone on this long stretch of road, you know. It was late, and I needed to stop for gas. I saw this old gas station up ahead, looked kinda sketchy, but it was the only one around for miles. So, I figured I didn't have much choice. Pulling in, I noticed something off right away. There were no other cars, no lights on inside, nothing. Usually, even in the middle of nowhere, you'd see some sign of life at a gas station, right? But this place was dead quiet. I got out of my car, feeling kinda uneasy. The air was thick with this weird silence, like it was pressing down on me. I walked up to the pump, but there was no sound when I squeezed the handle. No gas coming out. Looking around, I saw the store part of the station. It was all dark inside, but I could make out shelves stocked with stuff. I figured maybe someone was inside, so I went to check it out. The door creaked open when I pushed it, and I stepped inside. It smelled musty, like old grease and dust. There were aisles of snacks and drinks, but everything looked ancient, like it hadn't been touched in years. I called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" But there was no answer, just the echo of my own voice bouncing off the walls. Feeling a shiver crawl up my spine, I started to back out of the store when I heard something. It was faint at first, like a whisper in the wind. But then it got louder, this low murmuring coming from somewhere in the back. I hesitated, not sure if I should investigate or just get the hell out of there. But curiosity got the better of me, and I followed the sound. The murmuring led me to a door at the back of the store. It was cracked open just a little, and I could see a sliver of light spilling out from inside. I pushed the door open slowly, trying not to make any noise. And what I saw inside, it still gives me chills just thinking about it. There were people in there, but they weren't moving. They were just standing in a circle, staring straight ahead with blank expressions on their faces. And in the center of the circle was this thing. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before. It was tall and skinny, with long, spindly arms that reached out towards the ceiling. Its skin was pale and stretched tight over its bones, like it was wearing a suit that was too small for it. But the worst part was its face. It had no features, no eyes or mouth or nose. Just smooth, blank skin staring back at me. I wanted to run, to scream, but I was frozen in place. I couldn't tear my eyes away from it. And then it spoke, this raspy voice that sent shivers down my spine. "Join us," it said, and I felt this overwhelming urge to step forward, to join the circle of people standing there like statues. But something inside me snapped then, and I turned and ran as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I was back in my car, driving away from that place as fast as the wheels would take me. I didn't look back, didn't stop until I was miles away. And even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still watching me, waiting for me to come back. I don't know what that thing was, or what it wanted from me. But I do know one thing: I'll never stop at a gas station in the middle of nowhere again. We were on our way back from a road trip, cruising down the highway, laughing and joking as we reminisced about the adventures we'd had. But then, disaster struck. Somehow, we missed our exit, and before we knew it, we found ourselves in the heart of a rundown neighborhood. At first, we weren't too worried. We figured we could just turn around and find our way back to the highway. But as we drove deeper into the neighborhood, we realized that things weren't as simple as they seemed. The streets were empty, the buildings dilapidated and covered in graffiti. It was like something out of a horror movie. We tried to keep calm, reassuring each other that we'd find our way out soon. But as we turned down yet another deserted street, we saw them, a group of locals, standing on the corner, watching us with cold, hostile eyes. Instinctively, we knew that something wasn't right. These weren't just ordinary people going about their business. There was something menacing about them, something that sent a shiver down our spines. As we drove past, they began to follow us, their footsteps echoing ominously on the quiet streets. Panic began to rise in my chest as I realized that we were in trouble, big trouble. We tried to lose them, taking random turns in the hopes of shaking them off our tail. But no matter what we did, they were always there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for us to slip up. And then, just when we thought things couldn't get any worse, our car suddenly sputtered and died, leaving us stranded in the middle of the street. We were sitting ducks, completely at the mercy of our pursuers. As the locals closed in on us, their faces twisted with malice, we knew that we had to act fast if we wanted to get out of this alive. With trembling hands, we locked the doors and huddled together, praying for a miracle. But it was no use. They were upon us in an instant, banging on the windows and shouting threats. We were trapped, with nowhere to run and no one to help us. Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, a flicker of movement caught my eye, a narrow alleyway, hidden behind a row of dumpsters. It was our only chance. With a desperate cry, I urged my friends to follow me as I sprinted towards the alley, our pursuers hot on our heels. We ducked into the narrow passage just in time, the sound of their angry shouts fading into the distance. For what felt like hours, we stumbled through the maze of alleys and back streets, never daring to look back for fear of what we might see. But finally, just when we thought we couldn't go on any longer, we stumbled out onto a main road, our hearts pounding with relief. We flagged down a passing car and begged the driver to take us to safety, explaining our harrowing ordeal in breathless, disjointed sentences. And though they looked at us with skepticism, they must have seen the fear in our eyes, because they agreed to help us without hesitation. As we drove away from that nightmare neighborhood, leaving behind the horrors that had threatened to consume us, I couldn't help but feel a profound sense of gratitude for our narrow escape, and for the chance to live another day. But even as we left that place behind, I knew that the memory of what had happened would stay with us forever, a constant reminder of the dangers that lurk in the shadows, waiting to pounce when we least expect it. We were just a group of friends looking for adventure, seeking something to break the monotony of our everyday lives. So when we heard about an old, forgotten road that supposedly led to nowhere, we knew we had to check it out. The road was nothing more than a dirt track, barely visible beneath a tangle of overgrown vegetation. It was as if nature itself was trying to reclaim what had been lost to time. Undeterred, we set out on foot, pushing our way through the dense undergrowth as we followed the winding path deeper into the wilderness. With each step, the world around us seemed to grow darker, the trees looming overhead like silent sentinels. But it wasn't just the oppressive atmosphere that gave us pause, it was the eerie silence that surrounded us, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant cry of a bird. As we pressed on, our nerves on edge, we began to notice strange markings carved into the trees, symbols that seemed to pulsate with an otherworldly energy. It was as if the forest itself was trying to warn us away, to tell us that we were not welcome in this place. But we were determined to press on, to unravel the mystery of the forgotten road no matter the cost. And so we continued, our hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. As the sun began to sink below the horizon, casting long shadows across the forest floor, we realized that we had been walking for hours, yet still, there was no sign of civilization. It was as if we had entered another world entirely, one untouched by the passage of time. And then, just when we were about to turn back, we stumbled upon it, a clearing in the forest, bathed in the soft glow of moonlight. But as we stepped into the clearing, our joy turned to horror as we saw what lay before us. Scattered across the ground were the remains of something, or someone. Bones gleamed white in the moonlight, picked clean by scavengers, while tattered scraps of clothing hung from the branches like macabre ornaments. We stood frozen in shock, unable to tear our eyes away from the grisly scene before us. It was a stark reminder of the dangers that lurked in the darkness, waiting to claim unsuspecting victims. But it wasn't until we heard the sound of footsteps echoing through the trees that we realized we were not alone. Someone, or something, was out there, watching us from the shadows. With a sense of mounting dread, we turned to flee, but it was too late. They were upon us in an instant, emerging from the darkness with faces twisted into grotesque masks of rage. We ran as if our lives depended on it, crashing through the underbrush in a blind panic as we struggled to put as much distance between us and our pursuers as possible. But no matter how fast we ran, they were always one step ahead, their voices taunting us from the darkness as we stumbled and fell, our bodies bruised and battered from our desperate flight. It was only when we reached the edge of the forest, our lungs burning with exertion, that we dared to look back. And what we saw chilled us to the bone. Standing at the edge of the clearing, bathed in the soft glow of moonlight, were the figures of our pursuers, but they were not human. Their forms were twisted and distorted, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. With a cry of terror, we turned and fled into the night, our hearts pounding with fear as we raced back towards civilization, vowing never to return to that cursed place again. It was a typical evening as I drove home after a long day at work. The roads were quiet, and the only sound was the gentle hum of the engine as I navigated through the darkness. As I rounded a bend, my headlights caught sight of something unusual on the side of the road. It was a child, no older than 6 or 7, standing alone in the darkness. My heart skipped a beat as I realized the danger the child was in. Without hesitation, I pulled over and got out of the car, my mind racing with thoughts of how the child could have ended up there all alone. Approaching cautiously, I called out to the child, trying to offer reassurance as I knelt down beside them. But the child remained silent, their eyes wide with fear as they stared up at me. I tried to comfort them as best I could, asking if they were okay and if they knew where their parents were. But the child just shook their head, their lower lip trembling as if on the verge of tears. My heart went out to the child, and I knew that I couldn't leave them alone on the side of the road. Without a second thought, I picked them up and carried them back to my car, wrapping them in my jacket to keep them warm. As I drove, I tried to make sense of the situation. How had the child ended up on the side of the road all alone? And where were their parents? But the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt. There was something about the whole situation that didn't sit right with me, a sense of foreboding that made my skin crawl. Despite my misgivings, I pressed on, determined to do whatever I could to help the child. But as I drove, a nagging voice in the back of my mind warned me that things were not as they seemed. I decided to take the child to the nearest police station, hoping that they could help reunite them with their family. But as I pulled into the parking lot, a wave of dread washed over me. The station was deserted, the lights flickering ominously as if mocking my attempts to seek help. I hesitated, unsure of what to do next as I looked down at the child sleeping peacefully in the back seat. With a sinking feeling in my stomach, I realized that I was on my own. But despite the danger, I knew that I couldn't just abandon the child to whatever fate awaited them. I resolved to take matters into my own hands, determined to get to the bottom of the mystery and ensure the child's safety. But as I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone or something was following me every step of the way. The sense of unease only grew stronger as I reached the outskirts of town, the darkness pressing in around me like a suffocating blanket. I felt as if I was walking into a trap, with no way of knowing what horrors awaited me on the other side. But despite my fear, I pressed on, my determination to help the child overriding any sense of self-preservation. And as I navigated the winding roads, I vowed to do whatever it took to bring them to safety. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I arrived at the address the child had given me. It was a rundown house on the outskirts of town, its windows boarded up and its front yard overgrown with weeds. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the door handle as I prepared myself for whatever lay ahead. And then, with a deep breath, I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The house was dark and silent, the only sound the faint creaking of floorboards beneath my feet. I called out, hoping to elicit a response, but there was no answer. With growing trepidation, I began to search the house, my heart pounding in my chest as I opened each door and peered into every shadowy corner. But there was no sign of anyone, no clue as to what had happened to the child's family. And then, just as I was about to give up hope, I heard a noise from the basement. It was a muffled sound, like someone crying out for help. Without hesitation, I made my way down the creaking stairs, my pulse quickening with each step. And then, as I reached the bottom, I saw them. The child's family, bound and gagged in the corner of the room, their eyes wide with fear as they looked up at me in desperation. I wasted no time in freeing them, my hands shaking with adrenaline as I untied the ropes and helped them to their feet. And as we made our way out of the house, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. But even as we escaped into the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that someone was still out there, lurking in the darkness. I had just finished up some repairs on a car at the shop, and it was already late into the night when I finally got the chance to take it out for a test drive. The road was quiet, just the hum of the engine and the sound of tires on pavement as I cruised along the deserted streets. As I rounded a bend, my headlights caught something up ahead, a figure standing in the middle of the road, motionless. I slammed on the brakes, my heart racing as I tried to make out what it was. But before I could react, I felt the car swerve out of control, fishtailing wildly before careening off the road and into a ditch. The impact was jarring, the airbag deploying with a loud bang as the world spun around me. For a moment, I was disoriented, the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears as I struggled to catch my breath. But as the dust settled and the ringing in my ears subsided, I knew I had to get out of the car and assess the damage. I fumbled with the door handle, my hand shaking as I pushed it open and stumbled out onto the road. The night air was cold and still, the only sound the distant chirping of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. I could see the figure now, standing in the glow of my headlights, unmoving. I called out to them, my voice shaky with adrenaline, but they didn't respond. They just stood there, watching me with an intensity that sent a chill down my spine. I knew I needed to get help, to call someone and let them know what had happened. But as I reached for my phone, I realized with a sinking feeling that it was nowhere to be found. It must have been thrown from my grasp during the crash, lost somewhere in the darkness. I cursed under my breath, feeling a wave of panic rising in my chest as I realized just how isolated I was out here on this deserted road. I glanced back at the figure, half expecting them to have disappeared into thin air, but they were still there, watching me with those cold, unblinking eyes. I knew I had to do something, to get out of the situation before it got any worse. With trembling hands, I reached into the car and popped open the glove compartment, searching desperately for anything that could help me. And then, just as I was about to give up hope, my fingers closed around something cold and metallic, a flashlight. I flicked it on, bathing the surrounding area in a bright beam of light as I stepped cautiously away from the car and toward the figure in the road. As I got closer, I could see that it was a man, dressed in dark clothes and wearing a hood pulled up over his head. He didn't move as I approached, didn't even flinch when the beam of light from my flashlight illuminated his face. I called out to him again, louder this time, but still he didn't respond. It was like he was in some kind of trance, lost in his own world and oblivious to everything else around him. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to run, to get as far away from this strange man as possible. But another part of me felt a strange sense of obligation, a need to help him in whatever way I could. And so, with a deep breath, I reached out and gently touched his shoulder, hoping to snap him out of whatever trance he was in. But as soon as my hand made contact with his skin, I felt a jolt of electricity shoot through me, like a bolt of lightning striking from out of nowhere. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest as I stared at the man in shock. He hadn't moved, hadn't even blinked, but somehow I knew that he was the cause of everything that had happened tonight. I turned and ran, my feet pounding against the pavement as I sprinted down the road, away from the car and the strange figure that had caused all of this chaos. I didn't stop running until I reached the nearest town, where I collapsed on the sidewalk, gasping for breath and shaking with fear. It took me a long time to gather the courage to go back and retrieve the car, but when I did, there was no sign of the man or the strange presence that had haunted me that night. It was like he had never been there at all. To this day, I still don't know what happened out there on that deserted road, or who that strange figure was. But one thing's for sure, I'll never forget the terror I felt that night, or the feeling of being utterly alone in the darkness. It was a typical night shift for me, patrolling the deserted construction site to ensure there were no unwanted visitors. As I drove around in my security vehicle, the only sound was the soft hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of the radio. The site was vast and eerily quiet, with rows of unfinished buildings looming in the darkness like silent sentinels. Despite the stillness, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched as I made my rounds. As I turned a corner, I thought I heard something, a faint scraping noise coming from one of the abandoned buildings. My heart skipped a beat as I brought the vehicle to a stop and strained my ears to listen. Sure enough, the noise was there again, louder this time, like someone or something moving around inside. With a sense of unease gnawing at my gut, I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the vehicle. The beam of light cut through the darkness as I approached the building, my footsteps echoing off the empty walls. I called out, announcing myself as security, but there was no response, only silence. I hesitated for a moment, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end as I contemplated whether to continue. But duty called, and with a deep breath, I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The interior was dark and musty, the air heavy with the scent of damp concrete and dust. I moved cautiously, my flashlight casting long shadows that danced across the walls. As I made my way deeper into the building, the noises grew louder, echoing off the empty corridors like whispers in the night. My heart pounded in my chest as I rounded a corner, my hand tightening around the handle of my flashlight. And then, suddenly, I saw it, a figure lurking in the shadows, its form obscured by the darkness. My breath caught in my throat as I trained the beam of light on the intruder, ready to confront them. But as the light illuminated the figure, I realized with a jolt of horror that it was not a person at all, it was a mannequin, its lifeless eyes staring back at me in silent mockery. Relief flooded through me as I realized it was just a false alarm, a trick of the light playing tricks on my mind. I let out a nervous laugh, chastising myself for letting my imagination run wild. But even as I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, I couldn't help but feel that something was still not quite right. The noises had stopped, but the sense of being watched lingered, like a shadow in the back of my mind. With a shiver, I decided to cut my patrol short and head back to the safety of my vehicle. As I stepped back outside, the night air felt colder somehow, as if the darkness had seeped into my bones. I hurriedly made my way back to the security vehicle, my footsteps quickening with each passing moment. But just as I reached the safety of the driver's seat, I heard it again, a soft whisper, barely audible over the sound of the engine. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest as I strained to listen. And then, to my horror, I realized that the whisper was coming from the radio, the same radio that had been silent all night. With trembling hands, I reached out and turned up the volume, the static crackling ominously as the voice grew louder. It was faint and distorted, but I could make out the words that chilled me to the core. "Leave, now," the voice whispered, sending a shiver down my spine. I hesitated for a moment, my mind racing with fear and uncertainty. But then, with a surge of adrenaline, I slammed the radio off and threw the vehicle into gear. I didn't stop to question who or what had spoken to me. All I knew was that I needed to get out of there, and fast. I drove away from the construction site as fast as I could, the sound of my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. I didn't dare look back, afraid of what I might see lurking in the darkness behind me. It was only when I reached the safety of the main road that I allowed myself to breathe a sigh of relief. But even as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something unspeakable. As I made my way home, I couldn't help but wonder what had caused the strange noises and the eerie whisper on the radio. Was it just a figment of my imagination, or was there something more sinister at play? I was in the middle of my usual late-night Uber shift, cruising through the city streets with only the glow of streetlights to guide me. The night was quiet, the occasional car passing by as I waited for my next ride request to come in. When the notification finally popped up on my screen, I accepted it without hesitation and headed toward the pickup location. It was a dimly lit street, the aisles shrouded in darkness as I pulled up to the curb. As my next passenger approached the car, I felt a chill run down my spine. There was something unsettling about their demeanor, a sense of unease that lingered in the air as they climbed into the back seat. I tried to shake off the feeling as I confirmed their destination, but when they gave me an address in the middle of nowhere, my heart skipped a beat. It was the kind of place you only heard about in horror stories, isolated and desolate with nothing but wilderness for miles around. Despite my growing sense of apprehension, I forced myself to stay calm as I navigated the unfamiliar roads, the darkness pressing in around us as we ventured further and further from the safety of the city. As we drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about my passenger. They sat in the back seat, silent and still, their gaze fixed on something outside the window that I couldn't see. I tried to make small talk, to ease the tension that hung heavy in the air, but my passenger didn't respond. It was like they were lost in their own thoughts, oblivious to everything else around them. As we neared the address they had given me, my stomach churned with dread. The road was narrow and winding, the trees looming overhead like silent sentinels as we crept deeper into the darkness. And then, suddenly, we arrived at a lone house standing at the end of a long, gravel driveway, its windows dark and foreboding in the moonlight. I pulled up to the curb, my hands trembling on the steering wheel as I turned to face my passenger. But when I looked back, the back seat was empty. My passenger was gone, vanished into thin air without a trace. I panicked, my mind racing as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. Had it all been a hallucination, a trick of the light? But then, as I reached for the door handle to get out of the car, I heard it, a soft, whispered voice coming from the darkness outside. "Thank you for the ride," it said, sending shivers down my spine as I realized that I was now alone. Someone or something was out there in the darkness, watching me with unseen eyes. With a surge of adrenaline, I slammed the car into reverse and tore out of there as fast as I could, the sound of gravel crunching beneath my tires as I raced back toward the safety of the city. I didn't stop driving until I reached the brightly lit streets of downtown, where I pulled over and collapsed against the steering wheel, my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to catch my breath. I didn't know what had happened out there in the darkness, or who or what my passenger had been. But one thing was for sure, I would never forget the terror I felt that night, or the feeling of being utterly alone in the darkness with something sinister lurking just out of sight. It was supposed to be a fun road trip with my friends, a chance to escape the hustle and bustle of the city and enjoy some time together in the countryside. But as we drove down the winding country roads, the mood in the car grew tense. It started with a feeling of unease, a sense that something wasn't quite right. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the fields and forests that lined the road, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. As we rounded a bend in the road, our worst fears were realized. A group of masked individuals emerged from the trees, blocking the road with their bodies and brandishing weapons. Panic gripped the car as we slammed on the brakes, skidding to a halt just a few feet from the gang. They were armed and dangerous, their faces obscured by masks as they advanced on us with menacing intent. There was no time to think, only to react. I could hear my friends screaming in terror as I fumbled for my phone, desperately trying to call for help. But before I could even dial the emergency number, one of the masked figures smashed the window with the butt of his gun, glass shattering around us as he reached inside and dragged me out of the car. I fought back with all the strength I had, kicking and screaming as I struggled to break free from his grip. But he was too strong, his hands like iron vices as he dragged me away from the car and into the darkness of the woods. I could hear my friends calling out to me, their voices filled with fear and desperation. But there was nothing they could do as I was dragged further and further away from them, deeper into the heart of the forest. The gang moved quickly, their movements coordinated and precise as they herded us like cattle through the trees. I could hear them whispering to each other in low voices, their words filled with malice and intent. I knew then that we were in serious danger, that these people meant us harm and would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. But even as fear gripped my heart, I refused to give up hope. I knew that if I wanted to survive, I would have to fight with everything I had, to never give up until I was free from their clutches. With a surge of adrenaline, I lashed out at my captor, striking him with all the force I could muster. To my surprise, he staggered back, momentarily stunned by the blow. Seizing the opportunity, I broke free from his grasp and ran as fast as my legs would carry me, ducking and weaving through the trees as I desperately tried to put as much distance between myself and the gang as possible. Behind me, I could hear them giving chase, their footsteps pounding on the forest floor as they pursued me with single-minded determination. But I refused to give up. I pushed myself to run faster, to keep going even as my lungs burned with exertion and my muscles screamed in protest. And then, just when I thought I couldn't go on any longer, I saw a glimmer of light through the trees, the promise of safety and salvation just ahead. With a burst of renewed energy, I raced toward the light, my heart pounding in my chest as I stumbled out of the forest and onto the road. And there, just a few feet away, was the car, my friends waiting for me with open arms as I collapsed into their embrace. We drove away from the scene as fast as we could, the sound of our tires screeching on the pavement as we put as much distance between ourselves and the gang as possible. It was only when we were safely back in the city that we allowed ourselves to breathe a sigh of relief. We were bruised and battered, but we were alive, and that was all that mattered. As we sat together in the car, the events of that night replaying in our minds, we made a silent vow to never speak of what had happened, to bury the memory deep within ourselves and try to move on with our lives. But deep down, I knew that the horrors of that night would stay with us forever, a dark shadow that would haunt us in our darkest moments and remind us of the fragility of life.